So, just welcome Tristan to Burton.
Thank you.
I'll get out.
Hi. Good evening. As I said, I'm Tristan from TLMartin Ltd. I do IT. A lot of the tips here are going to be very much about the IT side. GDPR is not all about IT. It's one reasonably largest section within it, but there's a lot of other areas that I work with a couple of GDPR practitioners that really go through those overarching things. But what I'm here to do is give you some tips, some advice, and really to first of all make sure that you realise it's not scary. There is a lot of hype. There is a lot of scaremongering. There is a lot, you're going to be bankrupt, you're going to be fined, you're going to be charged so much money. There's a lot of overhype. But equally, there's a lot of other people going, it's never going to come in, it's never going to be enforced and all that. So what I'm going to go through are some of the main points about it. So first thing, what does GDPR stand for? It is the General Data Protection Regulation. Okay, we hear it there, but we don't actually hear the name actually coming out. It's a European rule for how we're going to protect people's data. We all collect our clients' data, whether they are the general residential customers, if we're dealing with sort of home people, or businesses. And inside those businesses, again, there are people within those businesses. Something we've not always had to deal with. Business to business has always been able to sort of evade some of the rules before. Well, a lot of our trade is business to business now, so it needs to be protected. It comes into force next May. People saying, oh no, it's not going to happen, it's going to come in May, but then there's going to be a bit of time for you to get yourselves prepared. No, it was actually agreed upon in 2016. This is the time to get prepared. It comes into force in May 2018, at the end of May, on 25th. That is when they can start making firms have to comply by it. We're in the zone right now where it is, we need to prepare for it. They just never really made that big announcement at the time to say it's about to be ratified. Well, it has been. That was in 2016. It's to replace the Data Protection Act. It's not a whole new bunch of rules. The old Data Protection Act, the thing that you look at when you're storing people's data for your mailing list, for that protection of data, it was made in 1998. In 1998, Google was just coming out. Amazon had only been out a couple of years. People weren't online that much. There wasn't all the social media of Facebook and all the other things that we use. There wasn't everybody having an email address. People had, well, very few people had a computer in their house. All that sort of technology has massively come on in the last, well, it's nearly 20 years. The last 19 years, all of this. And suddenly everything's become accessible because on your Facebook profile, how much data you store on there and how much you make it publicly viewable. What data you give to other businesses. I used to talk about an analogy that Tesco used to do, that it worked out that it suddenly started stacking the beer next to nappies. Why? Because it found out, with its looking at the data it collected, that at 6 o'clock at night, beer was being sold with nappies, so it put the premium one right next to the nappies, because it was blokes going in to get nappies on the way home, and while they're in Tesco they'd pick up some beer. So let's put the expensive stuff by nappies, because they're not going to walk all the way to the end of the store when they could pick some up right next to the beer. We're lazy. So it was all that sort of analysis, all this information we get and we harvest to go through. So all it is updating the rules after 20 years, because think about your phones right now. How much data of clients do you have on here? These didn't properly exist in 1998. I remember my BT Cellnet phone, about that big. It was actually a credit card size SIM card, and it could have a couple of contacts on, as in a name that was about 10 characters long and a phone number. You used to do the first half of the name and home, mob, and so forth to actually be able to store in multiple numbers. Now, addresses, email addresses, dates of birth, mobile number, work number, home number, work address, all that stuff we're carrying around in our pockets about our clients. So it's just making it up to date, and because of that it has a few extra rules that we need to start taking into consideration. That's why it's not scary. It's looking after the data. It will apply to all businesses. Lots out there going, oh, if you've got under 250 employees, it's not going to apply to you. No, it will apply to all businesses. Brexit is not going to get rid of it. We have agreed it in the UK with the ICO, which is the Information Commission's office, which is what looks after the Data Protection Act in the UK. It's not going to just disappear because we leave Europe. Yes, breaches do have to be reported, but I'm going to explain what a breach is later on. This is why it's important to be aware of it, to start making plans, because what you don't want to do is have to report those breaches. At the moment, there are a lot of companies that have breaches under the Data Protection Act, but haven't reported it. They don't report it because just think about that as your business. If you had to suddenly go, yes, my email was compromised and all my emails were read by someone unknown. It's not really good for your business persona. There's a big report about the significant financial penalties. You can get fined up to 2% of your annual turnover for a breach. That doesn't mean you will. The big concept there is TalkTalk got hacked a few years ago. They got fined £400,000. Under the new rules, they get fined 22 million. Do you think they're going to take your data a little bit more seriously than, well, it's going to cost us 400,000 if there's an accidental hack? Or actually we got 22 million we're going to lose now if there's an accidental hack? They're going to take that data a bit more seriously. That's where the fines are coming in for the big companies that hold so much data that they really need to be protecting it, because it's not just some pocket change for them. For yourselves, again, okay, if it was 2% of your turnover, but they're going to look properly at how much data is actually stolen. Were you actually taking precautions, or did you throw caution to the wind and go, I don't care about someone's data? Did you look after it? And that's all they're asking for, is you to take a little bit of responsibility for all that data you hold. It is protecting that personal data on all of your clients that you hold. The best thing I've heard to sort of phrase this is, treat other people's data the way you would want your data treated. How many people have given a business card out and suddenly their inbox is getting a newsletter every single day from a particular person they've given a card out? I know I've done it. I've not done the email, but I've given a card out, and my inbox has had an email every day from someone just giving me a newsletter trying to sell me something. It's like, that's not good business. He's never going to get the business off me. But that's spamming. I didn't agree to that when I gave him my business card. I agreed to a bit of communication, not an email every single day. So that's what we're looking at, is if you wouldn't want that to happen to you, don't do it to other people. So what's personal data? It's anything that can relate back to an individual. So typically things like names, address, email, telephone numbers, your bank details, car registration. One of the things that that's included this time is IP address. Now, if we're using the Wi-Fi in here, for instance, they're not storing our name against the IP address, so that doesn't need to be recorded. But if you're filling in a form, like you do in McDonald's, to say I'm joining the Wi-Fi, this is my email address, submit to use their Wi-Fi, then they will need to make sure that they've told you what they're going to do with your email address. A lot of places use it to get the email addresses so they can send you newsletters. They will have to explicitly tell you that's what they're going to do with it now. So it's about giving you that information. But if it's something personal, you've got a duty to protect it. There is special personal data that I just want to briefly go through. These ones are sensitive data that you can hold about people. Again, why do you want to hold it? Is there a reason for your business to hold it? What are you going to do with it? These ones, you do need to have what's called a data protection officer, as a person named within the organisation who is responsible for that protection. If you don't collect any of this data, you don't need someone designated unless you have over 250 employees. That's where that 250 number comes from, where people go, oh, if you don't have 250 employees, you don't need to abide by GDPR. No, the 250 employees is saying you have to have a person designated as your sole responsibility, well, not sole, sorry, your responsibility is data protection. You need to report that back and monitor it within the organisation. If you have that data about any of your clients, then you do. If you don't need it, then get rid of it. easiest way. If it's just normal personal data and you're under 250 employees, you don't need a designated data protection officer. But that's where that buzz number of 250 comes in. What we can do with data, or why we can collect data, it comes to these. If I'm selling a product and I'm selling it online, someone mentioned they do e-commerce, I need to know that person's name and address, otherwise I can't post it out. I can't meet my contractual obligations without the data. So I'm allowed to hold that data. If I have the email address, because I'm going to send them an email to say the item's been dispatched, that's fine. If I'm going to start sending them newsletters or product newsletters to say these are new items in stock, that's not, unless I've got permission. So looking at that, contractual obligations, you've not got to go and suddenly say, oh, can I have your name and address in order to fulfill the contract? If it's implied part of what you're offering as a service, you're allowed it. Same part with anything legal. You send invoices to people. You have to keep that data for 7 years. You need the name and address of the person you're invoicing to actually be able to send them the invoice. It's a legal requirement. No one can object to you holding that data. You've got to, it's the law. Vital interests of the person. If this one's the couple of wishy-washy ones, so these are very vague ones. The vital interest of the person is something along the lines of that it's important for you to hold in that benefit for the person. So it might be that, let's say you were hosting online, you might need to keep sort of the email addresses of them or some other extra details because it's in their best interest, it's in the interest that they're going through. The next one, though, is the public interest. There's actually been a recent one in the news under the data protection of that. There was recently a politician announced of accessing porn on his computer, and there's the 2 police officers who are retired who are now facing potential prosecution. They released this announcement to the news to say they came across a computer at a politician's who had access porn on it. And they released it claiming it was public interest. It was legal pornography. So it was nothing illegal, nothing that was untoward. That's why they're facing it, because it's not a public interest. The person's not committed a crime. They've just released some information that they should have kept protected because there wasn't a criminal part to it. So the actual 2 retired police officers who announced that are the ones facing the trouble. Why did they need to take it to the newspapers? Why did it need to get released? Yeah, it's things like that. Now, if it had been something illegal, well, that's clearly public interest. And that is also a criminal matter or a legal matter where they can process that data for that reason. Legitimate interests pursued by the company. This one is very vague. Some people are saying you can do it as in, well, that means you could potentially email someone to send some marketing. It's very up in the air. There is no definitive answer on that one. It could well more so be you want to contact a client because you are having to upgrade your web server if you're a hoster, so you're going to move them, so you're going to inform them of that. That's a particular reason to contact them. That is an interest of the company, but also an interest of the person. You're not sort of selling at them. The last option, and you've probably seen this at the top, is about the person giving consent. That really should be your last justification as to why you hold the data. If you can get it through any of the others, it's a lot easier because you've got a legitimate means to hold it. The consent is that last sort of resort. But you don't need consent if you need to do it for contractual reasons. You don't need consent if you have to do it for legal reasons. You only need consent if you... Best one I've heard is, I want to collect your date of birth because I want to send you a voucher on your birthday. I'm collecting something I don't need to offer for anything else, so I need your consent. But it's about being upfront with people. Why am I collecting your date of birth? Well, actually, I want as a company to be really nice and send you a birthday card because it's your birthday, and give you a little bit of a promotion towards my business. You've told them upfront why you want it. It's their choice whether they give it to you or not. That was done by Toys R Us years ago. I remember going there. You could fill in your child's date of birth, and you get a discount voucher at Toys R Us a week before their birthday. It was sort of, they told you why they wanted it and for what reason they were using it. So what do you actually need to do to be compliant? One of the first things is your policies. Before you look at the IT, you need to look at what data you have. You want to be transparent. But you'd expect to know what other companies are doing with your data. So be the same courteous back. What data do you hold? Why do you hold it? Where do you hold it? And how long do you need it for? So it's just a case of thinking, what data have I got? That little bit of planning beforehand. So your privacy policies, where you say about how you'll process data, just work out, what do you hold about your clients? Why do you hold this data? What do you need that data for? And as long as you're upfront about it, they know what you're going to use it for, and they can give you, either it's that legal requirement, the contractual requirement, or they can give you the consent to do it, because they know what you're going to do with it. We give business cards out. I'll go back to that example of our email addresses on. Does it mean we want to be spammed every day with a sales email from a person we've just given the business card to? Yeah, I will send you a newsletter weekly, or I'll send you a newsletter monthly with some information. That's the sort of transparency. Where are you holding this data? So you want to know that, because that's you protecting the data. If you've got employees, is it on their personal mobile phones? How much data is there? Is it just on your personal mobile phones? Is it only on your laptop? It's a good sort of exercise just to understand what data you hold and where. A client is able, or a person is able to request their data to be deleted.
So that's a question in terms of holding data.
Yeah.
So I saw a lot of my clients' data on third-party services for like account systems.
Yeah. I'm going to go through that one in a moment. It's fully addressed on that one, because that is the big question, and we were just discussing that earlier. So I'll get to that one, and if you've still got a question on there, I'll come straight back to it. The deletion part. A person is able to say, I want you to delete all my data. Well, if you don't know where it is, how can you make sure you've done it? But they can only request you to delete the consensual data, not the legally required. Again, a lot of hype about that, going, you must delete it as well. No, if you've got to hold it because HMRC needs you to see it on the invoice, you can't have to delete that data. So it's the same thing here. Deletion is, we want to be off the newsletter, delete our email address. We no longer want you sending us a birthday card, delete our date of birth. If you've traded with them in the last 7 years, so you've got their name and address on file, you've got to have it because HMRC says so. That's a legal requirement. They can't override that. They have the ability to request a copy of what data they hold, or you hold on them. Before, it used to be a £10 charge. It's now free, but they can't take the mick. They're not allowed to take the mick of contacting you every month for a request. Again, if you know where the data you hold on them is, it's very easy to sort it out. You've got about 30 days as a sort of a turnaround to pass that data back to them. But what data do you hold on them? Do you hold their name, their address, what information? And this doesn't just apply to IT, it also applies to paper. The Data Protection Act also applied to paper in 1998. Because people used to try and do, okay, I won't store it in a database, I'll store it in a filing cabinet. And the previous Data Protection Act sort of allowed people to get away with that. And 1998 they changed it to make sure you couldn't just keep things in paper. So you've got those sort of things there. So you want a policy, so you know a procedure, a plan to go, someone asked me for my data, I will do this, 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 this and this, and it makes your life so much easier. But it all comes from, what are you holding, where are you holding it? If you know that, it's probably a 5-minute job afterwards, because you've already got it noted. This comes to, where's your data get stored? There's a big hype and big comments about the data must be stored in the EU. Or must it? You use various facilities. Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, they're all cloud storage where you stick data, use files. It's great. You can have your data on your laptops and your desktops. You can have it between employees. You can access it on your mobile, on your tablet. Brilliant. But Dropbox is an American company. OneDrive is Microsoft. Google Drive, Google, all companies dealing worldwide. And do you know where in the world your data actually exists? Newspapers gave out a brilliant one about Dropbox, said if you have 250 users you can demand to have your data in the EU. That means you're paying $2,500 a month for Dropbox, because you have 250 users at £10 each. They didn't finish off the statement. It can be stored outside the EU as long as the company is part of what's called the Privacy Shield. Under the Data Protection Act, there used to be something called the EU Safe Harbour, which is where companies agree to follow UK rules on data protection, and as long as it followed them, they were classed as an EU Safe Harbour, so the data was allowed to be stored there. It's exactly the same, it's just been renamed to Privacy Shield. So Microsoft isn't going to say, Europe, you no longer can use Office 365, we're going to lose all that business. They're part of the Privacy Shield, as are Dropbox, Google Drive, your CRM software like Capsule, Insightly and InTouch. Stores lots of data. MailChimp for your marketing, websites, your web servers. An interesting one, if you, especially for hosters, if you use a server that's out in America, check the company is on the Privacy Shield, because you are storing personal data on that piece, on that computer, or your client will be. Are they part of that Privacy Shield? All you do is go into Google, type in the name of the company and type in the word Privacy Shield afterwards. You'll get a report up that will say whether they are or not. As long as they're part of the Privacy Shield, they are agreeing to abide by European data protection laws. The reason America's not in it by default is America just doesn't really care much how data is used. There's a lot of states out there with lots of different rules, and none of them are as stringent or strict as UK and Europe. There are countries outside of Europe that have strict data protection rules, like Andorra, Canada commercially. There's a list of other countries coming up that's being made of countries that are acceptable to hold data outside of the EU. So the hype about it must be within Europe, no. As long as they're Privacy Shield or one of the authorised countries, they're fine. Privacy Shield companies will just get registered on there just to make sure they're easily safe. They're just saying, we promise to abide by these rules and the data's protected. What data do you hold with you? Something worthwhile having a good check about. What data do you have on your clients with you? I've mentioned already about your mobile phones and your tablets, but what about your staff? Company laptops versus personal laptops. Company mobiles versus personal mobiles. If you've got employees and they use their mobile and it's their personal one, because we've all had the bring your own device, saves us companies money because we don't have to buy them a mobile. Do they have all that information on there? Do you know how they're using their phone? What happens when they're out on a Friday night, a bit drunk, phone falls out of their pocket into a taxi? Is that data secure? Because suddenly that's a data breach. Where do your backups get stored? Because a backup is a copy of all your data. Your memory sticks, and with laptops wise, we've all heard of the Ministry of Defence leaving a laptop or a memory stick out somewhere, it's got stolen. There's the other one just in the news today, I think it happened about a year ago, was with the top secret documents being just left in a car for 5 days and they got stolen. It's that sort of data, the protection of it. Where do you hold the data? Where is it accessible from? Do you have control of the devices and are they encrypted? As a teacher, a bit of a show of hands, who's an iPhone user? Who's an Android user? Bit of smug moment for iPhone users. By default, if I lose my phone, you can't do anything with it. My data is protected already. Because even there's the terrorists who had an iPhone, the CIA couldn't get into it because it's encrypted. Android, you need to turn that on yourselves. There's an option in the settings to turn on encryption. If your phone's encrypted and has a password on it, that's not a data breach if you lose your phone, because all that's been lost is encrypted data. So you've got your password, you're protected, and the data's encrypted, so they can't take the memory card out of it and plug it into another device and read it. iPhones, it is actually quite a big thing that they can actually boast about at the moment. The encryption is turned on by default. Androids, you need to go into your settings and there's an encryption option. You need to turn that on to encrypt your data. Make sure you don't lose your password, because if you do at that point, you can't get any of your data back. But again, same with laptops. if you've got personal laptops holding it, I had a client who had a hard time getting their company laptop back from an employee, and I'd only just taken over this client. We need to make some changes. Managed to get it back before he goes on holiday. Please make sure you leave the passwords in the bag so we can log into your account and get everything set up. Didn't bother leaving the passwords. He really was acting in such a way, don't want you looking at my computer. It took me 5 minutes to get into his account and I didn't have to hack his password. If you're not encrypting your drives, you just put another CD in the computer, you can reset a password. If you couldn't do that, you can take the hard drive out, put it in another computer, you're the administrator of that computer you own, you can view all the data. When you're buying your laptops and your computers, you go for Windows Home because it's slightly cheaper, because it's what's available in PC World. Go for the professional version, it's a bit more, but you can turn on encryption, and it encrypts the whole hard drive that someone like me, an IT expert, cannot just plug the hard drive into another computer and access the data. It ties it in with a strong password. So if your laptop's stolen, it's protected. You don't have to report it as a breach. So the big change over the next sort of couple of years is going to be, it's not going to be bring your own device, let's use a person's personal device to hold our data. It's going to be company owned, personally enabled. So you provide the device as the employer, as the company. You know it's encrypted, you know it's secure, but they're allowed to use it to play Candy Crush on. Whatever else they might need to do, but you know the data's protected because there's a strong password, and there's that. So again, these are minor things, because your data, if it's on OneDrive, is already encrypted. If it's on Dropbox, it's already encrypted. The only other things you've just got to watch out for is it being on your computer and it's turning on BitLocker for your on Windows laptop. Most people are already about 80% compliant with GDPR. You just need to have a bit of a chat with your IT guy, with a GDPR specialist, to have a look at the policies, and it will cover through. It's not a whole, let's start again from the beginning. It's just a little bit of tweaking what you've already got. You are pretty much already most of the way there. One of the big things is, what training do you give to staff and potentially yourselves? Because if it's your own business, you're an employee of your own business. What training have you got? What have you gone through? The weakest link in any computer system is always the user. Do your staff know what data they can access? If they've got a phone where they've got OneDrive linked onto it, do they actually know they've got all access to all that sort of personal information? If they don't, they might think nothing of their phone just being gone, or someone else using their phone, because they don't realise that actually if someone went in 2 folders deeper in their OneDrive, you've got all the medical records, or all credit card information, all date of birth information about a number of your clients. They don't know that. Have you made them aware of what they can access, what they can see? Do they need access to that? Because you can put restrictions on what levels. Do they know how to keep that data secure? One thing I will do before I finish off is give you an ability to have an uncrackable password, because there's a lot of things about passwords which is the entryway past encryption. Not to sort of mix business and personal items. Do your staff go in, sit down at computers, like, oh, my battery's a bit low, plug it in and plug it into the USB on the company PC? Suddenly charging up. Or maybe a business phone plugged into a personal PC. Suddenly iTunes wants to synchronize stuff, or Android wants to copy data. What's on the personal PC can affect the phone. What's on the phone, could it affect the PC? It's things like that. Whereas if they just plugged it into a wall socket, it's not transmitting data, it is only the electricity. We don't think much of it, it's just plug it in. What actually device? Is it something they're doing out in public into a public computer, just plugging in with a business phone? It's little nuances like that. And we might think it's common sense, but if you've never been told it, does it come across your mind? Do you actually think, actually, I don't know that computer and I'm just plugging in my mobile device to it? What could be on that computer? It's not mine, but it's just there. Until we just have someone actually say that, we don't always think along those lines. Take a bit of time, precaution. I had a conversation this morning with with an accountant. They email the pay slips over to the clients. What happens if we type in the wrong email address? Because they're just doing it quickly. Well, there's your clue. First of all, quickly. If it's something that's very important data, give it a double check. Spend a little bit of time just to make sure you're not sending someone else's pay slips to someone else because you've used the autofill on the email and you never just double checked who you were sending it to. A little bit of time, a little bit of patience. But do you know why or do they know why they need to do that bit of a check? Because thinking about their responsibility to protect that personal data, what they actually could be exposing. I gave a statement to yourselves right at the beginning about what sort of data you hold or how would you like your data dealt with. The question coming round to your staff could be, would you like your personal payslip emailed off to someone else? Would you like them to have your national insurance number, your address, how much tax you've paid? No, I wouldn't like them to have that. Then that's why you take a bit of care with someone else's data. Treat other people's data like you'd want yours treated. Phishing attacks, it's something with a lot of clients I go through at the very beginning is about the password and about phishing. To give one example, I had a client ring up. They had an email from someone who'd been hacked. It went from their email address, so it looked like it was legitimate. It went to claiming to be DocuSign, clicked on the link. What email client do you use? If she'd have gone further, it would have asked for the email, the username and password. It would have then sent emails to all of her clients. She was a bit unsure, but she recognised some traits with it because of training I'd done. She just contacted me and said, can you just double check this for me? Happily did, told her not to do it. Someone else she knows who's a friend of the person who sent it, who also received that, on a Mac, he was out of action business-wise for 2 days and £600 to get it up and running again because he clicked on it and given that information away, let alone whatever knock-on effect it's done. There's a Facebook, YouTube video. I can't believe you've had this on YouTube. And then you click on the link and it asks you to verify, you give your user, suddenly your friends are being contacted by you. That's those sorts of attacks. It's just that little bit of protection. If it's not taught in schools. It was in the school I taught at, but it's not taught by most teachers. Students aren't aware because it's not things students are exposed to. Students are taught what they need to know under the age of 18. So someone hitting 18 and coming to work for you, they've been taught what they need to know to stay safe while they were 16. Now someone needs to tell them how to stay safe now they're 18 and above. They're not just going to know it out of nowhere. They need to be taught it. How easy is it to access? So all that protects your data, and this is just the last bit, so I'm very short of time, data is a password. Once you've got it all encrypted, once you've got it all protected, all you're stopping you accessing, or anyone else accessing that data is a password. And you've all been told these rules. Don't use a word. Minimum of 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, must contain numbers. Contain symbols is the newest one in there, and sites are forcing that to happen. Different passwords for each site. Change your passwords often and don't have it easily guessable. And it's not really possible. Does anybody actually follow any of all those rules? No. Absolutely everyone? No. Fantastic. Very rare. There's always one.
You kind of expect that.
Okay.
What you do.
But we'll go with the question of, are they predictable? Passwords for each site. A tip that was given to people was use the first 3 letters of the website and then use your standardized password afterwards. So then that way you have differentiated it, but it's predictable because if you go to Dropbox and I know your standard password, I just put DRO in front of it. If you go to Google, I put GU in front of it. It makes the password different for each site because there's a pattern. The other part of how do we do this with minimum of 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, numbers and symbols are, okay, you've been told not to pick a word, but actually pick a word, trombone. Now change the letter, capital T, change the letters for numbers. O's go to 0s, E's go to 3s. We can do A's to 4s, 7 to T's, T's to 7s, things like that. So you have trombone, you've changed it to some numbers, and it makes it possible to remember, but it's also predictable. Because when they try to work out the password, they try the dictionary and then they try those possibilities, those predictable changes, because it's tips that have been given to people to try and make remembering a password that contains all of those easier. As soon as it's predictable, it's easy to hack. You want them to go to A, B, C, D. And then you want your password to be 20 characters long. So there's 92 combinations per character. So if you have 20 characters long, it's 20 to the power of 92. 92 to the power of 20 combinations. That's a very big number. And actually, I think it's the first time in a room without an accountant. I've actually said to every room I've ever done the password one in, there's always been an accountant. I'm just about to show you how to have a password that's so easy to remember, that's not crackable, because it would take them 43 quintillion years with today's computing power to work it out by a combination lock. And it's having a passphrase. This is my example one. This obviously isn't my password. I'm a geek. I love my games. I love IT. I rock 100% at Lemmings. Lemmings is an old game from back in the 90s. Fantastic game. 20 characters long. 43 quintillion years.
But you use that same passphrase on all websites?
I don't. I would have 3. It is, if you have a strong password, you can have 3 to 6 and you can get away with it fine with that different one. Because what you do is you group it into sensitivity. So really secure, mostly secure, quite secure, as into what the content's being held there, and then have another one that you go to, I don't know who you are, but you want a password off me, because I've got to create an account with you. You can have this one that if you're going to treat my stuff dangerously, it doesn't matter, because this is the one I give to testing play everywhere. The passphrase. Think of a sentence. Capital letter for each word. Even by doing that, even by having a pattern, there's so many words out there that you've got several levels of combinations. 100%, well, 100 gives me my numbers, percent gives me my symbol. I'm a geek, so at is going to be the at symbol. Well, even if they knew that was my pattern, that I was a gamer, that I wanted to have it, I was going to have a game as my password, what game would I choose? I use Lemmings with Training Kings when I've done this, because they're a Christian group. When I've done it with other groups, I've used Gears of War. I could argue with Lemmings, could anybody ever be 100%? There's always one Lemming that dies. So 99%. What's my percentage on there? You would have to really know me very well to even get close to predicting that, and of course that's nothing to do with what my actual passphrase is. So think about a sentence, something that you've got there that you can have as part of the sentence, a number and a symbol, a percent. Because again, even with 100%, there's nothing to stop you saying 0 to 100%. There's nothing to stop you saying 110%.
I use LastPass myself.
LastPass is great for storing, for having lots of different ones, but if your one you use was predictable, it's still hackable. If you use completely random, then yes, they have to go to combination, but it's just having that extra bit there. Having something like that, they can't crack it, because 43 quintillion years, if they crack that in that time, I'm really not going to care. 43 quintillion years later.
They deserve it.
They deserve it for the perseverance, they really do. And I hopefully would have changed it by then to another phrase, because I might have moved on to Lemmings too. So, hopefully that's giving you some tips and advice. GDPR is not scary, don't believe all the hype, it's real. But it's there to just really make sure you're treating other people's data properly. Thank you.